Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Hopkins Bloomberg Center at 555 Pennsylvania Avenue, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our symposium today, which is on Emerging Technologies, Innovation, and Governance, led by us here at SAIS, but as you'll see, with a cast of scores of extraordinary people from across the entire university. We really have an extraordinary set of conversations planned for you today that will showcase the range of wealth, knowledge, and expertise within Johns Hopkins community, from the space experts at APL to our material scientists and electrical engineers and computer scientists at the Whiting School of Engineering, bioethicists at the Berman Institute, and the Bloomberg School of Public Health, as well as biomedical experts and practitioners from the School of Medicine, political scientists from the SNF Agora Institute, and physicists at our own Institute for Assured Autonomy, as well as, of course, our many experts here at SAIS. And it's wonderful to have the opportunity to start off this symposium with our two extraordinary keynote speakers, the director of NIST, Dr. Laurie Locascio, and the president and CEO of RAND, Jason Matheny, and I'll introduce them formally in just a second. One of the most important reasons that I was privileged to have the opportunity to come to SAIS and Johns Hopkins 2 years ago was the opportunity to be in an environment and to collaborate with such an extraordinary group of scholars and teachers who are working at the cutting edge of the technologies which are transforming our lives in so many different ways. And our new home here, Johns Hopkins' new home at the Hopkins Bloomberg Center, offers a unique opportunity to bring together our experts from across the entire university and to connect our world and our work to the broader debates that are taking place here in Washington and around the world. And the symposium that we are holding today, while it's certainly broad-based in its range, only begins to scratch the surface of the kinds of issues that we are dealing with here in the university and that the rest of the world is also spending so much time focused on. So it's just really the beginning of a longer-term conversation across the entirety of Johns Hopkins. And here at SAIS, we're excited to launch this new, what we call our Emerging Technologies and International Affairs Initiative, which is dedicated to exploring the impact of these transformative technologies on their impact on global affairs. So for our students and who are current and future policymakers from across the globe, they are hungry to engage and be involved in learning about these emerging technologies, to understand their implications, and to think about how, as a society, we begin to make sure that we take advantage of the opportunities that these technologies represent, as well as being conscious of the risks and dangers that they potentially pose as well, whether it's in artificial intelligence, biotechnology, advanced satellites and space, autonomous weapons and autonomous systems, quantum computing, just to name a few. All of these issues are inherently transnational in nature, and that while individual governments, and certainly here in Washington, as we'll hear, are grappling with how we deal with these issues on a national basis, ultimately we are going to have to think about the broader international implications and think about how, given the different perspectives and interests across the world, how this can be managed on a transnational basis, whether it concerns the future of governance and regulations, the impact on the global economy, on peace and stability and war, as so many of the issues that we deal with on a day-to-day basis here at SAIS. So we think that SAIS is a great place to begin to have these conversations, and are privileged to have so many experts from across the university to be part of those conversations as we go forward. And it's an exciting time for all of us, and we're grateful that you took the time today to join us for this conversation. So we're going to begin today with a conversation with two of the leading thinkers and scholars, as well as practitioners, who are dealing with these problems of emerging technologies. And I'm just privileged to have them as our opening speakers here as part of our first conversation. To my far left, Dr. Laurie Locascio, who is the 17th director of NIST and the 4th Undersecretary of Commerce for Standards and Technology. She most recently served as Vice President for Research at the University of Maryland, College Park, and the University of Maryland, Baltimore, where she focused on the development of large interdisciplinary research programs, technology commercialization, innovation and economic development efforts, and strategic partnerships with industry, federal, academic, and nonprofit collaborators. Before joining the University of Maryland, she worked at NIST for 31 years, rising from a research biomedical engineer to eventually leading the agency's material measurement laboratory. She has a BS in chemistry from James Madison University, an MS in bioengineering from the University of Utah, and her PhD in toxicology from the University of Maryland, Baltimore. My closer left is Jason Matheny, the president and CEO of the RAND Corporation. He previously led the White House policy on technology and national security at the NSC, something I know and appreciate very much, and the Office of Science and Technology Policy. Before that, he was the founding director of the Center for Security and Emerging Technology at Georgetown University and the director of the Intelligence Advanced Research Projects activity, where he was responsible for developing advanced technologies for the U.S. intelligence community. He's worked at Oxford University, the World Bank, APL here at Johns Hopkins, the Center for Biosecurity in Princeton. He served on many boards and committees, including the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence. He has his PhD, happily, in applied economics from Johns Hopkins, as well as an MPH from Johns Hopkins, so we're delighted to have him back here, an MBA from Duke, and a BA in art history from the University of Chicago. So let me ask you to join me in welcoming our distinguished guests, and I'm going to sit down and join them for a conversation about emerging technologies, innovation, and governance. So thanks again for being here. And I do want to start off by, am I working here? Yes. Yeah, there we go. By asking you just to reflect a little bit about what are the technologies that we're focusing on? As we begin this conversation today, we're going to cover a range of issues from AI to bio to semiconductors and space. But as in your work today, if you think about what are the 2, 3, 4 technologies that you think are the most consequential in terms, not just in terms of their impact in technological innovation, but their broader impacts on society? And Laurie, maybe we start with you.
Yeah, so just start. There we go. Yeah, so I was saying we were talking before we came in here, and we all have our favorite list. There's critical and emerging technologies are the talk of the town, right? Everybody's very aware of not only their impact, but how they can really change our lives for the better or for the worse. And so that's really the discussion going on in many different fora right now. And I think that's so exciting that you're having that discussion today. The critical and emerging technologies that we pay most attention to right now at NIST that are really high priorities for us are clearly AI, quantum, NextG, and bioengineering, so engineering biology. Now, of course, NIST was also given the great honor to lead a big part of the CHIPS program and really building back up semiconductor manufacturing in this country, and also innovating in that space once again in the United States, not only in the design but in the development and engineering. That also is a priority of ours.
Great, Jason.
I love Laurie's list. I think the only one that I might add for sort of top 10 list is advanced energy systems, so both energy generation and storage. And then I think I would also add there's sort of a similar top 10 list for policy levers in technology policy that are sort of generalized across classes of technology. So things like the use of R&D tax credits, of STEM education grants, of export controls. There's a class of instruments that policymakers use, whether the technology is synthetic biology or the technology is fusion. We're going to have some toolkit. And one of the things I love about Hopkins is that you all have access to the range of expertise that you need in one institution for figuring out how to apply tool X to technology Y.
Laurie, NIST has obviously taken a very important role and gotten a fairly high profile recently, particularly on the recent work on artificial intelligence and your role in helping to think about a risk-based approach. It's a fairly unusual role for a government agency. It's not a regulatory agency. It's one that we think about in terms of looking at technical standards and technical work. How does NIST approach these questions? How do you define your role in working in this interface between the technical side of understanding these technologies and the more traditional regulatory agencies like, say, FDA or others?
So we are non-regulatory. We're very proud of that because of how we do our work, but we're also very proud to work with the regulators, right? We think we have great people to collaborate in the regulation space, but we are a non-regulatory agency. And our job is really since we were born in 1901, is to create trust in technology so that technology could be used and useful by everyone, right? And so that new technologies could enter the marketplace. And the marketplace used to be very, local in 1901, is very global now. So and the problems are very different now, obviously. So we, how we do our work is, first of all, through deep research. We have fundamental research across our laboratories. We've been working, for instance, in the AI space for decades. The same is true for quantum. So very, very long reach into our scientific knowledge. And that, we tie that very, very close to our policy development. So the policy people work very, very closely with the scientific and technical staff. I think that link is really important. You're bringing that together through a forum like this today. We bring it together actually in-house by connecting our science and technical staff with our policy people. But the way we do our work sort of on the global sense is we do have deep technical research. We develop that typically into maybe guidelines, and then that we bring onto the international stage in the form of standards that can then feed into regulation. So it is, it's not always linear like that, but it works very, very well because then you have scientifically backed guidelines that are technically sound. Those can be brought to the stage as technically, scientifically backed standards, and that can feed responsible regulation. But we work with the community always. We are a small agency, actually, with a really big remit right now. But we leverage really all the best minds in the country to do our work. We have some really smart people, but we work with all the smartest people that we can find to leverage our capabilities against theirs to really come up with that best possible solution together. I think that's really important.
So let me pursue that a little bit because when we think about technology innovation in this country, a lot of it has come out of associated with government, right? So if you think about Lincoln Labs at MIT, about the nuclear work that's been done in the labs. But today we see that so much of the innovation is taking place in the private sector, and it's a fiercely competitive private sector with a lot of proprietary interest in this. How do you deal with this problem? You're focused on openness and transparency. The best minds, many of the best minds are best minds, but they're also working in the private sector with all these concerns. How do you bridge that gap and make sure that we have the kind of insights into these things and both access to understanding what's going on in leading technologies and understanding the potential benefits and the risk when so much of it resides in the private sector?
I think it's really just a matter of coming face-to-face with the technical experts who understand what we bring to the table and what they bring to the table, and being very, very dedicated to building those relationships, as I said, for decades. And so we aren't, for instance, going to go into a company now and company X and say, now just give me your large language models. They would just laugh, right? But they will do that if you've already built decades of trust behind working with that company or working with the people in that company. And so it's really, honestly, I think the barriers are lower for our agency to work with others because we're a trusted entity and everything we do is based on good, sound technical rationale. And people understand that as well. It's not a political organization.
So, Jason, we've seen a great more activism from the government around these issues. really just in the last year or so, as there's been kind of greater public awareness around both the potential and risks of these new technologies. You did it from the inside at the NSC and at OSTP, and you're now watching, as a knowledgeable person involved in this field from the outside. What do you see? What did you learn from your own experience in trying to deal with this in the government, working with these emerging technologies, where so much of it resides in this private sector? And there's historically been a lot of tension and mistrust between government and the private sector around these issues. And how do you see this?
Yeah, it is true that I think I have never witnessed a case where a technology captured so much policy attention in such a short period of time as we've seen around AI in the last year. And I think part of it was being able to personally interact with ChatGPT. Policymakers and their staff had that experience of interacting with a technology that they hadn't been following and was deeply surprising in terms of its level of capability. And a capability that was sort of accessible to a degree that, interacting with a qubit might, not be right now. Or CRISPR-Cas9 kit. This was something that people could interact with. They could use natural language with. They could create prompts that, ask, like, to create some sort of Shakespearean-style sonnet about my congressional office. You can give it that sort of prompt, and it actually creates an answer that's pretty phenomenal. So I think that is, it's pretty unique in the history of technology policy, having such a dramatic increase in the interest of it in a technology in such a short period of time. Maybe right after World War II, the interest in nuclear technologies would be comparable. The dilemma that we have is sometimes called the Collingridge dilemma, which is by the time policymakers are paying attention to a technology, it's usually at such an advanced stage that it's very difficult to design sound policy around it. Because the horse has already left the barn. But if you're trying to design policies in advance of when a technology is sufficiently mature to think about what policies would actually be useful, it's hard to know what those policies should be. And it seems as though then you would be pre-regulating a technology before it's really sufficiently clear what the best policy approach is. And I think we feel this Collingridge dilemma around AI, maybe more acutely than we do even in other technologies. So as right now, for my position at RAND, as we're trying to advise policymakers on what to do around AI, around semiconductors, around biotech, around quantum, I think the biggest challenge that we have is around AI. In part because it's moving so quickly, the level of capability is increasing exponentially just due to the increasing volumes of compute that are thrown at the largest language models. And there is such enormous upside potential of the technology, but also really catastrophic downside risk if we don't get it right. So the stakes are really high, it's moving very quickly, and there's lots of policymaker attention. So lots of demands on people like Laurie for getting advice on evaluation, on metrology, all of these things that are highly consequential.
Can I just say one thing to that? I totally agree. And, you brought up the international issue, right? Well, simultaneously, while we're considering that in the United States around policy and so much policy attention, there's a lot of policy attention globally. So the importance of trying to get in sync while the technology is emerging rapidly, and while we're trying to rapidly adjust our own policymaking decisions around AI in the United States, that's happening globally, and we have to stay in sync. If we can't get harmonized, we can create chaos, honestly, with what's going to happen with this technology in the future. So we have to really think about harmonization while all this is emerging, and that's difficult.
So when we think about that, the possibility there, one of the challenges has always been that even if we decide to take a more cautious approach, let's say, and I want to come back to that in a second about how we should balance the risk-reward side, but we saw this, for example, in the area of encryption regulation when I was in government, which is you could have fairly rigorous constraints in the United States, but how effective is that if other countries can go ahead or other actors can develop the technology? And this is obviously particularly important in the context where we all think of this as a major competition, particularly between us and China. And the argument that we hear from Silicon Valley and others that if we kind of hamstring ourselves in terms of the development of these technologies, we're just going to cede the field to others who'll take advantage of that. And how should we think about that?
Yeah, I mean, first, I think it's to our competitive advantage to try to create safe AI systems. If we can avoid an AI 3 Mile Island, then we will be in the lead. I mean, if we can develop AI systems that are trusted, those are going to be more competitive AI systems globally. They'll earn the trust of consumers. The United States was behind in aviation until we created a regulatory framework that could ensure that aviation was safe, not just in the U.S., but for planes that we were selling overseas. And it really wasn't until that regulatory framework that the United States went into the lead in commercial aviation. I think the same will be true for AI. We also have a lot of leverage, in part because of our influence thanks to NIST and standard setting for AI. Groups like SC42 that are helping to set the standards for the future of AI, but also because of our prominence in the semiconductor supply chain, which ultimately affects everything that's done in computing. So the United States, Japan, and the Netherlands are responsible for over 90% of the semiconductor manufacturing equipment that sits at the base of this global supply chain. So the U.S. and 2 of its closest allies actually are in a really strong position to help set norms for how AI develops.
When you think about as we begin to think about these norms, we've seen the range of perspectives from people who have advocated a sort of an extreme version of the precautionary principle, which is let's just stop the whole thing until we understand better what the risks are, to those who are pretty much on the other side, which is we'll never know what the risks are until after we develop the stuff. So let's just go develop it, and then once we see what it is, then we can think about how to regulate. How should we be thinking about this? We've seen in different areas, again, going back to sort of the FDA and the like, there was a time in which we had the Delaney principle in which any risk of having kids. How do we think about this in terms of these new technologies?
Yeah, I do think about it in terms of like we've been here before. You mentioned nuclear, but biology. Really, we've seen many times in biology where we felt we are now at a crisis, right? And that resulted in, so CRISPR-Cas is one example of that. But before that, of course, there were the Belmont principles, and before that, there were as Helsinki, and before that, Nuremberg. I mean, there are all these times where we have to make really big decisions because of ethical issues that came up with result to, because of biology and medical experimentation. I think that what has happened is quickly, so let's take CRISPR-Cas, the most recent. What happened there was quickly the dialogue became either we are going to solve the world's most difficult medical issues, or we're going to create designer babies, right? So it's just, the conversation wasn't anywhere in the middle. It was really like, we're going to have this new class of people that we're going to create, or we're going to, so people, really what happened is the policy people and the scientists came together and really hit head on that ethical issue, right? With meetings, with discussions, with guardrails, with principles by which they asked people to agree. And then ultimately that resulted in furthering that discussion within regulators. So I think, we are faced now with that same kind of thing. AI can be used for tremendous good, for solving some incredible problem associated with disease in humans, or just for simplifying our lives. But it can also be used to disrupt societies, right? So I think the fact that these kinds of fora where we come together, where we as scientists talk to the policy people and make sure that we are uncovering all of the ethical issues that need to be dealt with, and then coming to agreement on how to put guardrails around them. That's really the stage where we are right now with AI. But we've seen it happen before in other areas, and we just have to respond quickly. And as you said, we have to respond very quickly because the technology is changing very rapidly.
I want to talk a little bit more about on the international side. So we've just had this really quite remarkable meeting at Bletchley in which people tried to come together. A set of principles were issued. They were pretty generic in type. How do you see the prospect of actually coming together with some form of consensus around these principles, norms, and the like, whether it's in the bio or the AI space?
I found the summit really encouraging, in part because it was announced that there would be an AI Safety Institute in the United States that Laurie and her team will be leading. I think that's going to be profoundly important to the future of the technology, because as Laurie said, there's so much upside potential to apply this technology for human health, for energy, for scientific discovery. So finding this middle path where we can develop safe, reliable AI systems that are trusted and can be applied in so many beneficial ways is going to be really valuable. The other thing that I found really encouraging from the summit was that there was a lot of shared interest in testing and evaluation using approaches like red teaming to understand how models could break or be misused so that we can design better guardrails. I think an interest in sort of know your customer screening for compute providers, coming up with responsible scaling policies so that we understand in advance what are the kinds of properties that large systems should have, and starting to think about structured access to very large models. And this problem or question of what kinds of models should be open source and what kinds shouldn't, maybe because of their misuse potential, is a really important and challenging one. And I think there was the beginning of a really good discussion on that topic.
One of the areas that gets a lot of attention because it's kind of easy to develop some nightmare type scenarios is the use of AI in the national security realm. And so we've had conversations, for example, about should we have conversations about the use of AI or automated systems in connection with nuclear weapons or the like. You've sat on the NSC. I mean, how should we think about this, and how plausible is it to think that, I mean, first of all, how big a risk do you assess this to be? And then second, how plausible is it to think that we could find ways to reach understandings or agreements to manage them?
Yeah, I think first the U.S. national security community has said we will always have humans in the loop when it comes to nuclear decision making. And we have encouraged other nuclear states to make similar commitments. It has been a challenge in dialogues with China or Russia to get similar commitments. I think we should keep trying. I think it's really important for there to be humans in the loop just because of right now the technical risks associated with having automated nuclear command and control. We see sort of semi-automated nuclear command and control in examples like the perimeter system in Russia. I think I'm very worried about different kinds of failure modes there. But I think a shared commitment to humans being in the loop is important.
Laurie, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I agree, and I totally support what Jason just said. I think, the other consideration is the social disruption that could really cause chaos internationally that could result from AI, and that's guardrails around that as well, or how we figure our way through that is really important, not just from that technology standpoint, but also from the just social uprising that can occur.
When you're both, in government, you're thinking about the kinds of people, the kinds of talent that you need to be able to think about and manage these issues. How can we make sure that the people who are working inside the government and trying to understand and kind of deal with the public dimension of these issues have the same kinds of expertise, knowledge that we see so dramatically in the private sector? How are we doing in terms of having the human capital and the workforce that we need? And especially, we think about this from universities. What should universities be thinking about in terms of helping you in the future have those kinds of capabilities?
I really appreciate that. So as Jason mentioned, we were asked to stand up the AI Safety Institute. And as I said before, partnership is really important for us in how we do our work and how we get this accomplished. We need all the best minds to be participating in this. And so last Friday, or the Friday before the holiday, we launched the consortium for the AI Safety Institute. So what we're asking is for people to join the consortium, to come together, to work with us. We're going to be forming a collaborative environment. We're going to do collaborative research, talk about policy issues, deal with red teaming. So there's going to be a lot of different work streams going on within the AI Safety Institute, all bolstered by the people who volunteer within the consortium. That's one aspect of it. But the other aspect is we need partners. So NIST has leveraged university partners very well throughout its history. Just one example is the Joint Quantum Institute at the University of Maryland and Gillette out at the University of Colorado, where we have really formed joint institutes coming together to solve some of the most difficult problems related to quantum. And so we're looking for that kind of partnership with universities to bring our scientists and technologists together with technologists and scientists from universities and policy people as well. But in AI, we need a lot of social scientists as well, obviously, people involved in ethics. So many different disciplines need to come together to really tackle this important issue. And it's going to be something that will be standing up very, very quickly. So, as I said, we're looking for partners as we go along.
I think when we were hiring at the White House for roles in technology policy, and when I'm hiring now for technology policy analysts at RAND, it's really challenging. It's a pretty small pipeline of people who have both the background in science and engineering as well as the background in policy or law. That intersection is pretty small right now in what's coming out of universities. So I think Hopkins really has unique potential for being able to address this pipeline challenge that we have. You all have so many different parts of the technology policy problem set that different parts of the university work on. If you're a scientist or an engineer, take classes in policy and law. If you're a public policy student or a law student at another university, then take classes in science and engineering. We need folks who are literate in each of those domains to be working in places like OSTP or commerce or treasury or state. We need technology diplomats. We need technology strategists at a scale that I think is unusual.
I love that comment because I totally agree. You know, when I went to graduate school, I learned science, right? But when you get into policy, everything that I learned about policy was really learned on the job. And the one thing that I learned is policy is, you want to have science-backed policy, right? So you want to make sure that it's backed, steeped in science. However, then you throw humans in the loop. And what that means is even if you have the best possible solution that you believe is absolutely right, you have to deal with humans to convince them that you're right. So you need diplomacy, you need negotiation skills, you need to be able to really articulate your thoughts very clearly. You need to collaborate. You need to know how to work in teams. These are all different skills that policymakers need on top of their understanding of the landscape of the technical world.
So I want to take a few minutes to cover a bit of the topics that we're going to preview for the panels that we're going to have today. And I want to start with semiconductors. You mentioned that NIST now has a role under the CHIPS Act. And I'm not going to ask you to do the pure policy side of this, but thinking about the evolution of the world of semiconductors, right? We now see a world in which the administration has put forward this sort of idea of high fence, narrow yard, From a technology perspective, how effective can this kind of strategy be? How is it possible to be able to segregate out a certain set of technologies and control them without controlling a broader set of technologies? And how do you see the field and the industry progressing going forward, and given the assumptions that this strategy is based on?
So the whole goal of the CHIPS Act is really to bring back manufacturing to the United States that we lost. I mean, this was a technology that was developed here, and then we outsourced. It went overseas. We still maintain the best capabilities in the world for design, and yet we have no capabilities to manufacture the most advanced chips in the United States, and that became the source of a lot of problems, right, for us in terms of supply chain, right? We realized, wow, we don't make things here. We've got a problem. So I don't think in my impression, we need to bring back that capability. We have to start making things here. Otherwise, we will always suffer, whether it's from COVID or geopolitical tensions or, some other natural disaster. We need to make sure that we can make things here to ensure that the rest of that we can function, that all the technologies and devices that we rely on have the capability to continue to be manufactured in the United States because we have the chips to do that, right? That they rely on. So I will say that, however, while we need to bring back manufacturing to the United States, we also need to collaborate internationally. The supply chain is a global thing, right? We have to make sure that we have the materials that we need. We have to make sure that we have the human capital that we need. We have to make sure that we are collaborating with all of the people that we can collaborate to ensure that we have the security in our supply chain to make sure that we can manufacture things here and manufacture them reliably and robustly. So while you were saying the idea that we're bringing everything back and maybe walling off, I think is what you were saying. We acknowledge that this is still a global marketplace, and we need to rely on international like-minded partners as well. And that's definitely part of our plan. We've been working very, very closely with other countries to make sure that we can secure our supply chain in multiple areas.
And we've obviously seen, there's been some good articles recently about the question about just how far this goes, right, in terms of, are we talking about the precursors? Are we talking about the chemicals? I mean, how do you draw the line in terms of what needs to be here as opposed to what we can tolerate being elsewhere?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, diversity of the supply chain is really important, making sure that you have reliable partners, making sure you're working with the right partners, but also, again, diversifying the supply chain so that you have multiple partners and multiple ways to get the things that you need in order to be successful. So those are two different strategies.
And just on the same line, I mean, part of it is the CHIPS Act and bringing things back here, but part of it is also the export controls and the like. And the question is just looking at this from as technologists, right? I mean, there's been a long-standing debate going back to the Cold War and the various technology control regimes we've had about how effective this can be. How much can you sustain a lead by technology denial, and particularly in the field of semiconductors? I mean, the premise here is that if we deprive others that we think would use these in a different way, that they won't be able to develop themselves. How do you think about that?
Yeah, mostly, and I'm sure Jason has a lot to say about this as well, but, I think the run faster has to be part of the equation, right? And so the CHIPS Act not only funded bringing manufacturers back, I honestly think just bringing manufacturers back is not going to be the answer. You also have to support that, not only with a robust supply chain, but also the incredible advances that can occur through research and development. And so there is a big chunk of the CHIPS Act, $11 billion, that's spent on research and development in this country, really building up that next generation of researchers who are going to make the next great advances, could be leapfrogging what we're doing now, right? I think bringing manufacturers back, I think they'll stay here because we are building that robust research and development capability that can really support them and make them interested in being in the United States, because then they'll stay ahead of the game and be more competitive. So I think, yeah, what you were saying is slowing down enough. Run faster. That's what we have to do. We also have to run faster.
Jason, your thoughts on the export controls?
Yeah, I think we need to both, drive faster and ensure that we're not, selling gasoline and engine parts to our main competitor. And we can do both. We can run faster ourselves while also not giving all of the technological advantages to our main competitor. I think when it was revealed in a New York Times investigation that the Xinjiang data center that China was using for broad-scale surveillance of 1 million people in Xinjiang, real-time video surveillance, was built using U.S. chips. And those chips, when they were produced overseas, were built using U.S. manufacturing equipment, or that China's supercomputers being used to design hypersonic weapons were made with U.S. chips or made with chips using U.S. equipment. I think that really led to this dilemma for the U.S., which is, to what extent do we want to be fueling our main competitor in its technological advances that are being used for human rights abuses and for destabilizing military modernization? And we do have options here. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union really was hobbled by lack of access to advanced microelectronics. China does not have the ability to indigenously manufacture leading-edge microelectronics, and probably won't as long as it doesn't have access to leading-edge manufacturing equipment, which so far they don't.
So I want to push you on that, because I guess the question is, and we were talking a little bit about this before we got together, is, they don't have it now because they could get it from us before, right? And now they can't get it. What is the barrier for China to be able to do what we know, what ASML does now, or what TSMC does now? Is it societal? Is it cultural? Why wouldn't they be able, if they were, denied the ability to have access to EUV and all the technologies that we need now?
So the EUV machine is probably the most complicated machine that humans have produced. Thousands of components, many of which are themselves export controlled. So one, you have to not just be able to create the system that includes all of these components. You need to be able to acquire or manufacture yourself all of these export controlled components. And then you've got tens of billions of dollars, literally, of R&D effort that have gone into constructing this device, some of which you could probably steal or reverse engineer, but a lot of which you can't, because it's based on sort of tacit knowledge of the developers at ASML. So I think it's a very steep technical challenge. And I think the argument that eventually China will achieve a technical breakthrough, I believe that's true on some timeline, but I think it's going to be more than 5 years, and those 5 years might matter a lot.
Yeah,
So,
I just wanted to say that I agree. I think that you asked the question, can we stop them? We can slow them down, and in the meantime, we can go faster. The combination of those two things is very powerful.
So I want to turn next to quantum. We talked a little bit about that outside. We're obviously, the specter of quantum computing and its impact on encryption is something that's captured a bit of the public imagination. I know there's a process underway now for the transition to new standards. How comfortable you are that we are moving forward? How much do we have a kind of an equivalent of the millennial problem of that we faced back when I was in government about the transition and the being caught off guard?
So, we've been thinking about this since about 2016, this idea that a quantum computer would be able to break current encryption technologies. And And so in 2016, we convened a very large group. We launched this process of thinking about making robust encryption approaches that were resistant to any quantum computer that could be developed. So that process led to today. It took a long time, but we ended up coming up with 4 robust standards that are post-quantum cryptography standards. They're in draft form now. They're going to be released in full form and final form early next year. Now, let me touch on something that I think you were alluding to when we were talking before this is, quantum had a lot of hype and we aren't there yet. And you were mentioning that maybe people's interest or attention is waning because they don't know what it's going to do and when it's going to really come, right? There are a lot of predictions around that. There are a lot. Some people say 10 years, some people say 100 years. That's a big window. I think most people think it's going to be sooner. I think the best thing you could do is to be prepared and safeguard yourself against something that could possibly damage or destroy or create such chaos in your ability to safeguard information that we are ready and prepared to launch this post-quantum cryptography algorithms, and people are ready to start putting them into their systems. Now, it's hard to know when a technology does that breakthrough. Right? I think, with CRISPR-Cas, it seemed like, it's this research, right? Everybody's building on each other's research. And then all of a sudden something happens that people say, wow, we didn't think that would happen. But it's a breakthrough. And the same thing happened with generative AI. The same thing could happen with quantum computing, right? Where all of a sudden you have this incredible breakthrough and then we're there. We are there.
So we should be at least cognizant of the possibility that a room temperature quantum computing possibility is out there. You never know. Let me on the same issue of kind of technological breakthrough. You mentioned energy, right? And sort of breakthroughs in energy related technology. I wanted to ask you a little bit about your thoughts about where you see the possibilities are. There are 2 things that people think about a lot. One obviously is batteries and storage, another is fusion. Thoughts about where we might be seeing dramatic changes in energy technology would be kind of transformative or consequential in societal, economic, et cetera terms?
Yeah, both. And I would also just add fission back there too. I mean, we're also seeing more reliable and safer, smaller, more modular fission reactors. But I think what's happening in fusion is really exciting. I mean, we're seeing not only commercial fusion companies like Helion and Commonwealth pursuing roadmaps that actually do look like they could achieve economically viable approaches to fusion, but also increasing private sector investment in a number of different approaches that kind of diversify the portfolio of possible fusion designs. So I think those are all really interesting approaches and provide hedges. On storage, I mean, we're seeing a pretty significant decrease in the cost per unit density for energy storage, and we're also seeing a proliferation of research, not just federal, but especially commercial. So I think there's a lot to be optimistic about. But I mean, to go to sort of Laurie's earlier point, and then your point at the beginning about the shift in research burden from the federal government to the commercial sector. Right after World War II, I think it was 75% of R&D in the U.S. was federally funded. Now it's less than a quarter. So I mean, it's a pretty dramatic change. We should be thinking about where there are market failures. That is, where is the commercial sector likely to underinvest for various reasons, either because of time horizons or because it's a public good that you're not going to be able to draw profit from. And that's where places like NIST are really doing heroic work, like standard setting and metrology. These are things that don't have natural commercial markets.
Other areas you think where we need to do more on the public side in terms of either direct financing or tax support or the like? Yeah,
I mean, on the regulatory side, definitely the the limits of self-regulation by companies is, I think, going to become more apparent in places like AI, where the interests of the frontier labs, the companies, and public interests can diverge in pretty short amounts of time. I think one other area where there just needs to be much more work in general is technology forecasting, and in understanding both the prospects and the limits for our ability to look forward on technology. And I recommend Richard Danzig's paper on this, Driving in the Dark, 10 Propositions about Forecasting, in part so that we can be humble about our ability to forecast, because we're not going to have a perfect vision for what the future looks like, but we should at least understand exponential curves. And I think part of the challenge in technology policy today is that we haven't been thinking about these exponentials. We have underestimated the degree of progress in computing and its application to AI. And I think right now we should imagine that a year from now we'll have models that are 10 times as large as the ones that are operating today, given the level of investment as well as the advances in algorithms and compute.
So we're also going to do a panel on space later today. And, you know, there's one of these sort of, we see a lot of activity in the private sector. We see a lot of now reliance on the private sector for launch capability, for satellite constellations. How do you see the evolution of the U.S. and humans' involvement in space, and how much do we need to think about? Are there possibilities of technological breakthroughs that you see that would have an impact on our thinking about the possibilities of space exploration?
So there's a lot going on in discussion around space commerce, right? And what happens in the future in terms of who owns space, how we manage space, what we market in space. So I think but how that relies on technology development really, well, I mean, there are so many technologies that need to be developed in order for us to actually make space into a marketplace, right? Or how we actually do our marketing or market in space, right? How we live in space, how we exist in space, how we operate globally around that as an asset. There's a lot of technology development that needs to happen, but I'm not really deeply steeped in that right now.
Jason, are you guys doing any work on this?
Yeah, Rand does some work on space policy. Space is really hard. It's a pretty inhospitable place for biology. There's radiation, there's lack of oxygen, there's really low temperatures. It's just really a hard place. But there's a lot of useful things to do in space. One of the things that I think is really important for space policy is including more economics. There's been a surprising dearth of economic analysis of space platforms, of getting to LEO, how much does it cost per kilogram. There's just very little rigorous analysis of the economics of space access, of space operations, of space services. So any economists in the room or space technologists who are interested in doing the math on the economics, I think there's a pretty wide open field.
So I want to end on the speculative side. You talked about technology forecasting, but in the back of your mind, what are the surprises that we should be thinking about that maybe is not part of the public debate now in the world of technology and innovation?
Well, you probably do a lot more forecasting than I do.
One of the things we are pretty nervous about is what the future of a highly distributed synthetic biology supply chain looks like. Again, like enormous upside potential for this technology to address human medicine, to advance materials, energy, but also potential for misuse. If you can buy, a $10,000 DNA synthesizer off of eBay that you could use to construct a virus, and it's unregulated. There's nothing to prevent you from doing that. The likelihood of you're getting detected or stopped is really low. Several years ago, a couple of virologists were able to construct a pox virus de novo for less than $100,000. The destructive potential of smallpox, if reintroduced into the human population, would be probably 100 million deaths or more. So I think figuring out a way of governing synthetic biology in a way that we can still capture all of these enormous benefits but prevent misuse or prevent catastrophic accidents will, I think, be a profound challenge and an important one for you all to solve.
Yeah, I guess you said, what aren't we thinking about that are the biggest problems right now? I do think that there are some all the technologies that we mentioned at the beginning, engineering biology being a really important one, quantum computing, AI, 6G, energy technologies. I mean, these all have huge policy issues that we're dealing with right now that are really impactful, and we have to make the right decisions at this point in time. Now, are there any on the horizon that we haven't thought of? I'll tell you, these are pretty heavy ones in the world right now, so, and we're thinking about them.
Great. Well, I'm really grateful for you taking the time to be with us here today. I mean, these are amazingly challenging and interesting things, and I think for all of us, trying to figure out this balance about how we, take advantage of technology, because we've seen the huge benefits it can have in, curing disease and eradicating poverty and creating new opportunities for people is really important. But how do you manage the balance and risk? And so much of that depends, as you said, from the beginning here, is based on knowledge and the research and understanding both the capabilities and the risks. And that's why this partnership, that we are very focused on and, what's going on in the universities and how we can take advantage of the ability to look at these questions and do the research and then connect to the world of policy is really central to all of us, and strengthening that dialogue and the ability of people to talk across the community so that we don't have this sort of gap between the people who are at the frontiers of designing and innovating and the people who are trying to figure out how the society copes with it is one of our big challenges. So I want to thank you all for being with us today, and it's a great start to what's going to be an amazing day of conversation here at the Bloomberg Center. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you.